Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. So I've created a list on my notes app on some of my favorite enemies to lovers books, and honestly I kept adding to this list because originally I had 5 books and now I have 7 to recommend to you guys, so I'm excited to talk about them. But I'll basically explain the gist of their enemies to lovers relationship because the overall plots of these books are quite complicated to explain, especially because some of them are series, and we also have some really tame ones, but we also have ones that kind of do involve some torture and murder and all that stuff. So it goes down, okay, it progresses. I would say that one of the tamest is Crave, which is a series that I read last year and I absolutely loved it. I read the first book and then I read the rest of the book in one go and it was so good. It's one of those series where I swear it's crazy. Okay, a lot of things happen that doesn't really make sense, but it's fun to read. We basically have Grace and Hudson, who Grace hears a lot of negative things about Hudson. For example, he started a war or something like that. I can't exactly remember, but he was involved in a war. He killed a lot of people. People hate him. They see him as evil, so when she first meets him, she doesn't really have a good impression of him, but then we get to see Hudson's true personality and how their feelings for each other develops. I love Hudson so much. He's actually one of my favorite, male love interests, as well as he's one of my favorite characters in that series overall. We also get the trope of them falling in love twice, which I loved reading how they fell in love twice, because especially if you read the series, you would kind of know what I'm talking about. It's really hard to explain because I don't want to spoil too much about it, but I really love seeing the banter between the two characters and how their relationship also developed throughout the series. But it is complicated, which is all I'm gonna say. I'm just gonna say read the series, okay, because it's really good. And the romance is just kind of like an added plus to it. Dance of Thieves is also, I would say, a pretty tame enemies to lovers. We basically have 2 people who are kidnapped and they fall in love in the time of them being kidnapped. So once they are freed, they have to go their separate ways because they obviously have their own duties. And there is a lot of betrayal that is involved in the book, which goes on to the next book, which is the book that I love the most in this duology, because that book has a specific trope that I really like, and that's where all the angst is going on. The first book, in my opinion, was a little bit boring, and in terms of the romance, I kind of wished it was a little bit slow burn, because I swear they get kidnapped in the first quarter of the book and then they fall in love and it just happens really quickly. You guys probably know what These Violent Delights is about, but it's basically a Romeo and Juliet retelling where Juliet and Roma, who are rivals because they are on opposite gangs, and they have this history, which is why they further dislike each other. But again, the first book wasn't my favorite. I kind of thought that they didn't really have a lot of chemistry, but the second book, I should have known what was going to happen in the ending, because obviously it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but still it shocked me to my core. But also I just really liked how their romance panned out in the second book. I just think that we got more insight into their background and kind of just the dynamics of the relationship in an actual romance rather than just hatred with each other. And obviously because they are in separate gangs, they do have the ability to kill and poison each other if they wanted to, so all the things that happened I felt like added to the tension. Fallen Kingdom was just a really interesting fantasy book, and it's really fun to read. It's kind of like Game of Thrones, but to be honest I wouldn't really know because I've never watched or read Game of Thrones, but it just gave me that vibe. It's a really fun fantasy series. There's a lot going into it besides the romance, but we have, I would say, multiple enemies to lovers stories. It's not just one, but our main one is Magnus and Cleo, and they are born in different kingdoms and they're heirs to the throne. And basically Magnus' father invades Cleo's territory and Magnus' father kills Cleo's father, and Magnus and Cleo are forced to marry each other for political reasons. So obviously they hate each other because they don't want to be married to each other. Cleo hates Magnus, obviously, and Magnus is also in love with his sister, who is not his biological sister, but that is also extremely awkward. Later, as we continue on with the series, we get to see their relationship develop, and I really like the romance because it's one of those romance where it's pretty subtle. You just get certain hints of them slowly starting to fall in love, and I think it's just really interesting the circumstances of the relationship and how it developed. But we also get a second couple from my memory, which is Lucinda, who is Magnus' sister, and somebody else which I'm not going to mention. But in general, this series, I would say, has a lot of changes in lovers. There are multiple lovers that are introduced and then they get killed. Don't really know if that's a spoiler, but you don't really need to think about those characters. I recently read the first 3 books in the All for the Game series, which was an interesting thing to read because there were certain aspects of it that I was like, no way. I just feel so uncomfortable with this whole situation. We basically have Andrew and Neil, and their relationship is super complicated because when we first meet Andrew, he is a psycho because he's on drugs, whereas Neil, he's introduced to this group of people and he's kind of like, what is going on with them? What is wrong with them? By the 3rd book, I feel like Andrew and Neil kind of have this understanding of each other where Neil is really the only one who, I guess, can really not connect, but can really understand Andrew's background and wants to protect him instead of Andrew protecting everyone. I wouldn't say this is like enemies to lovers, but I would just say that it's very interesting, and I would say that in the beginning it is toxic, and I really questioned how their romance would progress. And while I still question that, I really like how the romance is written because I just like the subtlety of it. I just love romance where we get the little hints between the 2 characters. I talk about 𝐛𝐨𝐲𝐬𝐢 all the time on this channel, so I'm not going to explain too much into it because if you haven't read it yet, I definitely recommend it because it's really good. It has a lot of romance, politics, a lot of lovable characters. I don't even like reading about politics if I'm being honest, but in this one it was just really interesting because I wanted to see the characters win. But to explain the enemies to lovers part of it, we have 𝐛𝐨𝐲𝐬𝐡 and 𝐜𝐨𝐧𝐭, and basically 𝐛𝐨𝐲𝐬𝐡 has been tortured for a couple of days because he is said to be a son of a traitor, and then when 𝐜𝐨𝐧𝐭 first meets him, he kicks 𝐛𝐨𝐲𝐬𝐡 in the chest trying to kill him, and 𝐛𝐨𝐲𝐻 does nearly die, and guess what? 𝐜𝐨𝐧𝐭 falls in love with 𝐛𝐨𝐲𝐻, and then later he's like, oh my gosh, I regret kicking you in the chest because now you're sick and injured and it's all my fault, and if you die I can't live without you. And that's basically how they first meet and how their whole relationship develops. But honestly, it's so good. The amount of quotes that I've highlighted, just like, it's beautiful. Strike the Zenith is actually the book that inspired me to make this video because I read it and then I was like, oh, this is so good in terms of enemies to lovers, and I was like, this is it, I have to recommend this book to people. But Strike the Zenith is basically set in a war, and we have 2 strategists. So we have Zypher, who infiltrates another camp, and we meet the strategist named Crow, and they admire each other a lot and their skills, but they are also still really loyal towards the masters. The thing is, when we first meet Crow in the book, I knew straight away that he was the one. I knew that he was gonna be the love interest because the chemistry between them, the banter. I don't know if it's just because I loved Crow in general, but he was honestly just such a funny character to read about, especially the way that he talked in like very certain serious scenes. But again, this book is pretty political and there's a lot of things that go on, especially in the 2nd book. I would say there is a lot of like killing. I don't know, it's really complicated because both characters, they do stuff to each other. And does the relationship end well? I don't know, you have to read it. But I would say if you do read this duology, read the bonus chapter, because the bonus chapter was the cutest thing I've ever read and definitely worth reading. I also just think that the covers of these books are super pretty, and I swear when I saw the 2nd book and I saw Crow and I was like, oh, that is what Crow looks like. He does not look like what I imagined him to look like. I fell in love 10 times more. I think I just have a weakness for men who look like Crow. Like just that long hair, pretty clothes. That's all the enemies to lovers books that I could come up with. And to be honest, I didn't really realize that they're enemies to lovers until I got to the point of like, oh yeah, circumstances have made them to become enemies, and I don't know how, but they fell in love. Thank you guys for watching this video. Give me any recommendations if you have some, because I would love to read some more enemies to lovers books, and I will see you guys in another video. Bye!